Something has been quietly changing inside your soulmate, and what makes this so powerful is that they may not have realized it until recently. For a long time, they believed they understood what love was supposed to look like. They thought love needed certainty, constant closeness, clear communication, and circumstances that made everything feel easy. They may have believed that when two people genuinely belonged together, there would be no confusion, no hesitation, and no reason to question what was happening. But then you entered their life, and slowly those beliefs began to feel incomplete. Your connection may not have followed the rules they once trusted, and that has left your soulmate questioning something much deeper than the relationship itself. They are beginning to question what they actually believed love was. At first, they may have tried to explain their feelings logically. They may have told themselves that the connection was simply unusual, that timing was complicated, or that certain emotions would eventually disappear. But something about you stayed with them longer than they expected. Even during moments of distance, your presence continued to occupy a meaningful place in their thoughts. And listen carefully, because this is where their old understanding of love began to crack. Your soulmate may have realized that they had always associated love with certainty, yet their strongest emotional experiences with you often came during moments when they couldn't explain what they were feeling. They may have expected love to make everything simple, but instead, this connection made them look deeper into themselves. It forced them to notice emotions they normally avoided and questions they had never thought necessary to ask. Why did your presence affect them so differently? Why did certain conversations remain in their mind long after they ended? Why did they feel emotionally connected even when circumstances created distance? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, why did this connection still matter when they had every reason to believe they should have moved on? Because your heart needs this right now, understand that your soulmate isn't necessarily discovering that everything they believed about love was completely wrong. They are discovering that their definition was too limited. They are beginning to understand that love isn't always about perfect circumstances or constant certainty. Sometimes a meaningful connection challenges you precisely because it reaches places inside you that you had never allowed anyone else to reach. And now your soulmate is beginning to wonder whether meeting you didn't simply change how they felt about one person. Maybe it changed what they believe love itself can actually feel like. And once your soulmate began questioning their old definition of love, something else started happening that they could no longer easily ignore. They began comparing what they once believed love should feel like with what they actually experienced through their connection with you. At first, this comparison may have happened quietly. They may have remembered previous relationships, past attractions, conversations, or situations where they thought they understood what love meant. They may have remembered how certain connections looked from the outside and how convinced they were that those experiences represented everything they needed. But now, when they look back with greater honesty, they are beginning to notice a difference. Some connections may have felt comfortable, predictable, or easy to understand, yet they didn't leave the same emotional impression. With you, something felt different. And listen carefully, because this is where your soulmate's questioning becomes much deeper. They may have once believed that if someone was truly right for them, there would never be confusion. They believed that love should always come with obvious answers. But their experience with you challenged that belief, because even when circumstances were uncertain, the emotional impact remained. Even when communication wasn't perfect, certain feelings continued. Even when distance appeared, your memory didn't simply disappear. This may have confused them for a long time, because they were trying to measure an emotional connection using rules that were never designed to explain it. They may have thought, if this connection is real, why is it complicated? If these feelings matter, why can't I simply understand them? If I am supposed to move forward, why does something inside me keep returning to the same memories? These questions may have become increasingly difficult to dismiss, Because your heart needs this right now, your soulmate may also be realizing that they previously confused certain things with love. Perhaps they believed familiarity was enough. Perhaps they thought physical attraction automatically meant emotional compatibility. Maybe they believed that having a relationship that looked stable from the outside was more important than feeling genuinely understood inside it. But your presence may have shown them the difference between being around someone and actually feeling connected to them. There is a powerful difference between having someone who listens and having someone who makes you feel heard. There is a difference between being admired and feeling truly seen. There is a difference between spending time with someone and feeling that your inner world matters to them. Your soulmate may now be recognizing those differences because of what they experienced with you. And listen carefully, because another realization may be forming. They may have started comparing how they felt before knowing you with how they felt after you entered their life. Perhaps they became more emotionally aware. Perhaps they started asking deeper questions about themselves. Perhaps certain insecurities or fears they had ignored suddenly became impossible to avoid. Maybe your presence encouraged them to see parts of themselves they had kept hidden. That can be uncomfortable, but it can also be transformative. Sometimes a person changes your understanding of love, not because they give you every answer, but because their presence forces you to ask better questions. Your soulmate may be experiencing exactly that kind of internal shift. They may now understand that love isn't simply about finding someone who fits perfectly into an existing life. Sometimes love challenges the life you thought you wanted and makes you reconsider what actually matters. This doesn't mean your soulmate has every answer yet. In fact, their uncertainty may be part of the process. They are learning to separate what they were taught to believe from what they personally experienced. They may be asking whether love can remain meaningful, even when circumstances aren't ideal. They may be questioning whether emotional depth can exist without constant contact. They may be realizing that a connection doesn't have to be easy every second to be important. And perhaps the biggest comparison is happening inside their own heart. They are comparing the person they thought they needed with the emotional experience they actually valued. Maybe they once wanted someone who could give them stability, but now they understand that emotional safety matters just as much. Maybe they wanted someone who would never challenge them, but now they realize that genuine growth sometimes comes from being confronted with feelings you would rather avoid. Maybe they wanted certainty, but now they understand that honesty is more important than pretending to have every answer. And this is why your soulmate's old beliefs are beginning to feel incomplete. They are not simply comparing you with other people. They are comparing the person they used to be with the person they are becoming. Your connection has become part of that transformation because it forced them to experience love in a way they couldn't neatly categorize. They may not know exactly what they will do with this realization, but they are beginning to understand something important. The connection didn't fit their old definition because their old definition was built around what felt safe and predictable. What they experienced with you introduced something deeper: emotional awareness, vulnerability, and the possibility that love can reveal parts of yourself you never knew existed. And now that they have begun seeing that difference, they cannot easily return to the way they thought before. The more honestly they look at their past, the more they realize that the question isn't simply whether you were different from everyone else. The real question is why your presence made them question what they thought they already knew about love. And that question is leading them toward an even deeper realization about what your connection awakened inside them. And as your soulmate continues looking deeper into these feelings, they are beginning to understand something they never fully recognized before. Perhaps the most important thing you brought into their life wasn't simply affection, attraction, or emotional excitement. It was awareness. Your presence made them notice parts of themselves that had remained hidden for a very long time. Before you, they may have had a comfortable definition of love. They may have believed love was about finding someone compatible, building a stable relationship, avoiding unnecessary complications, and making sure everything felt predictable. But your connection challenged that comfort because it reached beyond the surface. It made them feel things they couldn't easily categorize, and now they are realizing that those emotions were teaching them something about themselves. And listen carefully, because this is where their understanding begins to change from simply thinking about you to understanding what your presence actually represented. Your soulmate may remember moments when they felt unusually comfortable opening up to you, even if they didn't consciously understand why. They may remember conversations where they revealed thoughts they normally kept private. They may remember feeling seen without having to explain every detail of themselves. They may remember moments when your presence brought a strange combination of peace and vulnerability. At the time, they may have simply accepted those feelings as part of the connection. Now, with distance and reflection, they are beginning to recognize how rare those experiences actually were. They may have started asking themselves why they trusted you with certain parts of themselves. Why did they care so deeply about your opinion? Why did your words stay with them? Why did certain moments continue replaying in their mind long after everything had changed? Because your heart needs this right now. Your soulmate may be discovering that you didn't simply make them feel loved. You made them feel emotionally visible. And there is a profound difference between those two experiences. Being loved can feel comforting, but being truly seen can be transformative. When someone sees parts of you that you normally hide, it becomes much harder to return to the version of yourself that existed before that experience. Your soulmate may now realize that this is one reason your connection remains so meaningful. You gave them an emotional reference point they didn't know they needed. They may have experienced other forms of affection since then, but something about being understood by you continues to stand out. This realization may also be forcing them to reconsider what vulnerability means. Perhaps they once believed vulnerability was weakness. Maybe they thought showing too much emotion gave another person too much power. Perhaps they learned to protect themselves by staying emotionally controlled and never revealing too much. But around you, some of those defenses may have become harder to maintain. They may have felt themselves becoming softer, more honest, or more emotionally present. That could have frightened them at the time. Now they may understand that the discomfort wasn't necessarily a sign that something was wrong. It may have been a sign that something real was being touched inside them. And listen to this, because this is where their old understanding of love begins to transform again. Your soulmate may be realizing that love isn't always supposed to protect you from uncomfortable emotions. Sometimes genuine connection brings those emotions to the surface so you can finally understand them. It can reveal insecurity, fear, attachment, hope, and vulnerability that you might otherwise keep buried. Your presence may have done exactly that. You didn't have to intentionally teach them anything. The experience itself became the lesson. Through knowing you, they may have discovered what emotional safety feels like. They may have discovered how deeply they want to be understood. They may have realized that they don't want a relationship based only on convenience or appearance. They want something where both people can be honest about who they are. This realization can be both beautiful and painful because it may make them recognize what they previously settled for. They may look back at old beliefs and wonder whether they were choosing what felt safe instead of what felt meaningful. Perhaps they walked away from certain emotions because they were afraid of where they might lead. Perhaps they convinced themselves that a connection should be easy to understand before allowing themselves to trust it. But now they are beginning to realize that some of the most important emotional experiences don't come with immediate explanations. Sometimes understanding arrives much later, after you've had enough distance to recognize what the experience actually changed inside you. And your soulmate may be at that point now. They are looking back and realizing that their experience with you changed their emotional vocabulary. Before you, they may have used simple words like attraction, compatibility, commitment, and security. Now they are thinking about deeper things: emotional safety, authenticity, vulnerability, recognition, and genuine understanding. Those concepts may not have carried the same importance before, but now they do. And this is why they are quietly questioning everything they once believed about love. They are not simply questioning whether their feelings for you were real. They are questioning the entire framework they used to understand relationships. They are beginning to see that love isn't always about finding someone who makes life easier. Sometimes it is about finding a connection that makes you more honest with yourself. And perhaps that is the greatest impact your presence had on them. You didn't simply become someone they remember. You became part of a lesson they continue carrying. Even if circumstances changed, even if distance appeared, and even if they tried to move forward, the understanding remained. They now know that there are forms of connection they cannot reduce to simple explanations. And once someone learns that about themselves, it becomes very difficult to return to the old definition of love they once accepted without question. And now your soulmate is entering the part of this realization that may feel the most uncomfortable, because they are no longer questioning only what they felt with you. They are beginning to question where their beliefs about love came from in the first place. For a long time, they may have carried certain ideas about relationships without ever stopping to examine them. Perhaps they believed that love should always be easy. Perhaps they believed that the right person would never create uncertainty, that strong feelings should immediately lead to clear decisions, or that walking away from something complicated was proof of emotional strength. These beliefs may have protected them for a while, but your connection has started exposing the limitations within them. And listen carefully, because this is where your soulmate's inner world begins to shift. They are realizing that some of the rules they followed were not necessarily created from personal truth. They may have been shaped by past disappointments, fear of vulnerability, previous experiences, expectations from people around them, or simply the desire to avoid emotional risk. They may have learned that staying guarded was safer than opening their heart. They may have believed that needing someone made them vulnerable. They may have convinced themselves that if a relationship wasn't perfectly straightforward, it wasn't worth pursuing. But after experiencing what they experienced with you, those beliefs don't feel as convincing anymore. Your presence may have shown them that emotional depth doesn't always arrive in a neat package. Sometimes it arrives unexpectedly. Sometimes it creates questions before it creates answers. Sometimes it makes you uncomfortable precisely because it forces you to confront something genuine within yourself. Because your heart needs this right now, your soulmate may be realizing that they used to judge relationships by how easy they were to manage rather than by how deeply they affected them. They may have chosen situations that felt predictable because predictability gave them a sense of control. But your connection may have taken them outside that comfort zone. They couldn't completely control how they felt. They couldn't simply decide which memories mattered. They couldn't force themselves to stop thinking about certain moments. And that lack of control may have frightened them more than they admitted. Now, with greater emotional distance, they're beginning to see that perhaps the problem wasn't always the connection. Perhaps the problem was that they didn't know how to handle the depth of what it brought to the surface. And listen to this, because another realization may be emerging alongside that understanding. Your soulmate may be looking back at moments when they chose logic over emotion and wondering whether they confused being rational with being honest. Of course, logic has its place. Circumstances matter. Compatibility matters. Healthy boundaries matter. But they may now understand that emotions cannot simply be treated as inconvenient information. Their feelings were trying to tell them something about what mattered to them. Maybe they ignored those signals because acknowledging them would have required courage. Maybe it was easier to say, "This won't work," than to admit, "This matters to me, and I don't know what to do about it." That distinction can change the way someone understands their past. Your soulmate may now see that some of their previous decisions were made from fear rather than clarity, and that realization can bring regret. They may think about what they could have done differently, They may wonder whether they should have communicated more openly, trusted their instincts more, or allowed themselves to experience the connection without immediately trying to define it. They may even wonder whether they were so focused on protecting themselves from disappointment that they accidentally protected themselves from something meaningful as well. This doesn't mean they now believe every difficult connection is automatically destined to succeed. It means they are becoming more mature about what love requires. They are learning that love isn't simply about comfort. It also requires honesty. It requires vulnerability. It requires the willingness to acknowledge emotions, even when they don't fit neatly into your plans. And perhaps your connection became important because it forced them to learn that lesson personally rather than intellectually. Before you, they may have understood vulnerability as something dangerous. After you, they may be starting to see it as part of genuine intimacy. Before you, they may have thought love should always provide certainty. After you, they may understand that sometimes certainty comes only after you have the courage to face uncertainty. And this is where the emotional turning point happens. Your soulmate may be realizing that the old version of themselves would have dismissed this connection because it didn't fit their expectations. The person they are becoming, however, is asking different questions. Instead of asking whether everything was perfect, they are asking whether it was meaningful. Instead of asking whether circumstances were easy, they are asking what they learned. Instead of asking whether they could control the outcome, they are asking whether they were emotionally honest. Those questions are changing the way they see you and changing the way they see themselves. And perhaps the most powerful realization is that you didn't necessarily change their definition of love by giving them a perfect relationship. You changed it by showing them that love can make a person look inward. It can expose fears. It can reveal needs. It can challenge old assumptions. It can force someone to become more honest than they were prepared to be. Now your soulmate is standing in that honesty. They may not have every answer, and they may still be processing what everything means. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. They can no longer use their old definition of love to explain what they experienced with you. Something about that connection reached beyond the rules they had created, and now your soulmate is arriving at the realization that brings everything they have been thinking about into one place. After questioning their old beliefs, comparing their past experiences, and looking honestly at what your presence awakened within them, they are beginning to understand that the biggest change was never simply about how they feel toward you. It was about how they understand love itself. For a long time, they may have believed that love needed to fit a certain picture. They may have thought it had to be predictable, comfortable, perfectly timed, and easy to explain. They may have believed that if two people truly cared about each other, there would never be uncertainty or difficult emotions. But their experience with you challenged that idea in ways they couldn't ignore. And now, instead of trying to force the connection into an old definition, they are beginning to question whether that definition was ever complete. Listen carefully, because this is the most important realization of the entire message. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that meaningful love isn't always measured by how simple something feels. Sometimes its significance is revealed by how deeply it changes you. Your presence may have made them more aware of their emotional needs, their fears, their boundaries, and their desire to be genuinely understood. You may have shown them that being emotionally seen can matter just as much as being physically present. You may have helped them recognize that vulnerability isn't necessarily weakness, and that opening your heart doesn't automatically mean losing control. These are lessons they may not have been ready to understand when the connection was happening. But now, with distance and reflection, they are seeing them differently. Because your heart needs this right now, your soulmate may be realizing that they no longer want a version of love built entirely around avoiding discomfort. They want something authentic. They want emotional honesty. They want a connection where both people can be themselves without constantly performing or pretending. And when they think about why these qualities matter so much now, they are reminded of what your presence made them feel. That doesn't mean they are romanticizing every difficult moment or pretending the past was perfect. In fact, they may be seeing the imperfections more clearly than ever. But they are also seeing that imperfection doesn't automatically make something meaningless. Sometimes the imperfect experiences teach us the most important truths about what we need. Your soulmate may now understand that the connection mattered not because everything went exactly as planned, but because it revealed something inside them that they could no longer ignore. They may also be recognizing that some of their previous ideas about moving on were incomplete. They may have thought moving forward meant forgetting, becoming indifferent, or completely disconnecting emotionally from the past. Now they understand that moving forward can also mean accepting what an experience taught you and carrying that wisdom into the future. They don't have to erase the connection to grow from it. They don't have to deny what they felt to become stronger. And perhaps this realization is giving them a sense of peace they didn't have before. Instead of constantly asking why they felt so differently around you, they are beginning to accept that some connections simply leave a deeper impression. They may never be able to reduce your presence to one simple explanation, and perhaps they no longer need to. And listen to this, because there is another layer to the truth. Your soulmate may now be realizing that the person they thought they needed and the person who made them feel emotionally alive were not always the same thing. Their old definition may have focused on what looked right, what felt safe, or what made sense on paper. Their new understanding is becoming more focused on authenticity, emotional safety, mutual understanding, and the ability to grow together. That shift is significant because it means their future choices may be guided by a much deeper awareness than before. They are learning to listen to themselves rather than automatically following the expectations they once carried. And perhaps that is the greatest impact your presence had on them. You didn't simply become someone they remember. You became part of the reason they understand themselves differently. Your connection may have exposed emotional truths they would have continued avoiding if they had never experienced it. Now those truths are part of who they are. They may still have questions about you. They may still wonder what could happen next. They may still have fears about whether circumstances could ever change. But beneath all those questions is a new understanding that cannot easily be reversed. They know now that love isn't always about finding the easiest path. It is about recognizing what makes you feel emotionally honest, what encourages you to grow, and what allows you to see yourself more clearly. And when they look back at their experience with you, they can see that it did exactly that. It challenged them, it softened them, it exposed them, it made them question assumptions they once considered unquestionable. Most importantly, it made them realize that they were capable of feeling more deeply than they thought. So if there is one truth your soulmate is carrying forward from this entire experience, it is this. They may have entered the connection believing they already understood love, but they came out of it understanding themselves differently. And that is why your presence continues to matter, not necessarily because everything is guaranteed to return exactly as it was, but because what they learned cannot simply be forgotten. They can change circumstances, move through different chapters and meet different people, but they cannot unlearn what the connection revealed about their heart. The old definition of love may have given them comfort, but your presence gave them something more valuable. A reason to question, to grow, and to become more honest about what they truly need. And once someone discovers that kind of truth about themselves, they can never completely return to the person they were before.